Hi, hello everyone. My name's Tommy Whitelaw, and I'm here today joined by my colleague, Sean Mayer, who's the advisor on person-centred care to the Scottish Government. With great thanks to Jane Joy and colleagues at the University of Glasgow for asking us to host this recorded session for nursing colleagues in Singapore. We're really honoured to be here today. Can I just ask my colleague Sean to say a wee quick hello?
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Tommy. Thank you for the invitation, and looking forward to having some time to speak with you about something that's so important to all of us, no matter who we are, no matter where we work. Looking forward to sharing some great examples of how people have put this into practice in the real world, and also looking forward to hearing Tommy's story again.
Thank you. This session will come in two parts. The first part will be quite personal. It'll be very personal to me. I'll be sharing some of my own experiences as a son caring for his mum, my mum Joan. And then the second part, Sean will give some tips and guidance on turning some of making the good stuff happen in the real world with people. I hope that sounds okay. We've also put a wee page together with lots of resources and links to some of the things we'll speak about to go along with this page. So thank you to the University of Glasgow, to Jane Joy and colleagues for inviting us, and thank you to colleagues in Singapore for taking the time to listen. Firstly, I'll just take a wee minute to bring my slides up. So once again, thank yous for this kind opportunity. Just a further bit of background. My name's Tommy Whitelaw, and I work on a little project called Carer Voices at the Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland. Carer Voices was created originally to harness work of a campaign that I started from my bedroom whilst caring for my mum. I'm not going to speak too much about the project today. As mentioned, there's a wee page with lots more information. I'm really going to speak about how we get to that part and really how I got to meet Sean also many years ago. So my name is Tommy Whitelaw, and I was a full-time carer for my kind and beautiful and magnificent mum Joan. My mum passed away on the 22nd of September 2012, and my mum lived with vascular dementia. And I cared for my mum at home from 2007 until my mum passed away. I came back to Scotland, to Glasgow, to visit mum in 2007, not because of dementia or to become a carer. I really had no clue what either of those two things were. I was coming home for my own reasons. For the 25 years previous to that, I worked in the music industry and lived and travelled around the world pretty much 12 months of every year. But I was getting a bit burnt out. I was becoming quite disillusioned. And also I had started making a few mistakes. And they were just some of the reasons I was needing a break. I was taking a break and coming back home to spend time where I grew up. But before coming back, people started to get in touch to share their concerns. But I just thought maybe mum just doesn't want to go to places she used to like to go to or do things she used to like to do. But in coming back, things had changed, and they were going to change continually and consistently for the next nearly 6 years. And you know, when I first came back, it was all about me. I'd made a big decision to take a 2-month break from my job. And I thought, while I'm home for those 2 months, I'll put little things in place so that I'm better at keeping in touch and keeping a wee eye on mum once I return to my job. But that 2-month break became 4 months, 6 months, 10 months, and suddenly a year. And within that year, my mum was diagnosed with vascular dementia. A really lonely diagnosis that set the theme and the standard for so many things to lie ahead. With neither of us quite understanding what was happening within, around, and beside us, and becoming isolated from the lives we used to know. So people who used to phone my mum suddenly stopped phoning, and people who used to pop in for a cup of tea stopped coming in for a cup of tea. And there was two of us becoming quite lost. We were lonely, and quite often we were scared. I then stayed at home for the next nearly 6 years as my mum's son and carer. And for the first part of this session, I would just like to reflect on some of those experiences. I want to go back to the third year. You know, I would wake up most mornings and put the cover back over my head and just have a cry to myself. I have no clue what I'm doing. I have no clue how to do this, Mum. How do we make it through today? But the first question I asked myself each day, as soon as I gathered my thoughts together, was today. How do I keep my mum included today in every conversation, every decision, with every individual, based on my mum's poetry of life? For how hard my mum's worked with 2 jobs at a time, for as long as I can remember in life, and such goodness she shared in life, and never be seen as an illness, a condition, or just a wee lady with dementia ever again. And I really didn't know how to do that. One of the first things I started doing was writing a wee blog, and do you know what? It helped me feel better. At night when my mum was asleep, I would write about things that made us smile or cry or feel safe or scared. But I wanted to find out how other people managed. Maybe if I could find out how other people managed, I could try and copy them and try and become a better son. So on my blog, I made a promise that if I could find a week's respite, I would walk around Scotland for a week, not to raise money, but to ask people to share the stories with me so that we can celebrate the good stuff. What about that nurse, that healthcare assistant, that clinician, that volunteer, that hospital, that care home, that community? But also question things that weren't so good. And if people would share these stories, I would take them to the Scottish Parliament and ask them to read them. Never as a protest, always as a son. I arranged to meet people at bus stops, train stations, car parks, supermarkets, street corners, anywhere I could get to. And people started writing to me first by the hundreds and now by the thousands. From Scotland, from England, from Ireland, from Wales, from Europe, from America, from Australia. I mean, from all around the world. And every single letter that we've received to this day, well, they've always been about love. They're about the day 2 people meet and set eyes upon each other for the first time and think, do you know what? I think I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. They're the love for a lover, a partner, a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a grandson, a granddaughter. All those incredible relationships each one of you carry with you each day. Because I think each one of you listening in today is unique. I think each one of you listening in today is remarkable. And I certainly think each one of you is beautiful. And your story matters, and my story matters. And our story should matter to every organisation we work for or receive a service from. The love was outmatched and outnumbered in just about every letter by the words loneliness and isolation. But the thing that stood out about the letters was always people. It's people who make a difference. It's people who change lives. Sometimes I'd read those letters and think, you know what? I'm so glad you met that person in that hospital today, that care home, or in your front room. And no matter what nursing path you take, and no matter what nursing role you play, firstly, you'll have great skill, great knowledge, great learning. But for me, much bigger than that, each one of you here today has the potential and opportunity to transform people's lives and experiences. I mean, what an incredible gift to have, eh? What an incredible role to play, that you're part of one of the greatest professions we've ever created. And the reason it becomes a beautiful profession is because it's individuals like you that make them so. And just like the letters, it was always the people we met. And I just want to share one experience with you. And I hope when I describe this nurse, it's your kindness that I'm describing. I came back in 2007 for my mum to put her arms around me. And within 5 years, my mum was no longer able to walk, no longer able to speak, no longer able to recognise her son sleeping on her bedroom floor, so I could be close by if Mum needed help in the middle of the night. And each time those changes happened, they left us on our knees, just when we thought we'd found a way of making it through each day, we'd wake up and dementia had changed everything. Things we could do and achieve the day before, we could no longer do them. And we kept having to find new starting points in life. I got up one morning to help my hardworking, dignified mum with her breakfast and medication. And my mum had had an accident in her bed. And it was that quick. In one overnight sleep, my mum was doubly incontinent. And I really didn't know what to do. The first thing I knew was that my mum should not sit like that for a second. No matter where that care's being provided, no one should ever be allowed to sit like that for a second. The standard that we walk past each day is the standard that we accept. And the only thing I could think of doing was if I got the bath and I filled it so high with bubbles and bubble bath, and if I kept my eyes closed, then I wouldn't see anything a mother would not like her son to see. And I got Mum's favourite shampoo that day, so I wanted my mum's hair to smell beautiful. And I knew if my mum could, she would use the shampoo that she'd been using for about 40 years. Because the things that matter to Mum and the things that matter to me can be very different things. I helped my mum out the bath and into her nice pyjamas, and I sat in her sitting room in despair. I mean, am I doing the right thing? If Mum could still speak, what would she sit down and say to me today? How did my mum feel about that? How did I feel about that? I phoned up to try and get some help, at first on a waiting list. I was then told a nurse would come out on the Thursday at 1 o'clock to give us tips and advice. And I knew she was coming at 1 o'clock, and I thought, I'll help my mum in the bath at 12:30. I want my mum to be so beautiful. Wherever our care's been provided, to support people to be their best. But I also wanted, as that nurse leaned over to maybe examine my mum, that she would smell the shampoo and smell my mum's beautiful hair. And she would think to herself, Joan Whitelaw, every time I'm beside you, your hair must smell beautiful. And every time before I leave you, Joan, your hair must smell beautiful. I wanted to set a standard with some help, some kindness, some encouragement. We could keep achieving for the last months of my mum's life. And while I was helping my mum, the door went. It was a nurse. She had arrived about 20 minutes early. And I shouted downstairs, the door's open, I'm helping my mum. Please, can you come up? And as I heard her coming up the stairs, I started crying louder than I'd ever cried before. I think we just needed someone to notice we were falling apart. And she came walking in the bathroom and at first never said a word. She just looked at the two of us. She then put her arm on my shoulder and she whispered in my ear that she thought that I was doing a great job of caring for Mum. And I have to tell you, that second, my heart felt stronger. I thought, maybe I can do this. Maybe I'm still able to help. She then knelt down quietly and introduced herself to my mum, and she showed me how to live. She showed me how to wash, and she showed me how to help dry my mum like a lady. Because I'm sure my mum done all of those things like a lady when she could do them by herself. She then said, I'm going to put this in place and that in place. I'm going to get a bed that moves up and down and a chair that moves around. I'm going to do all these things. And 45 minutes later, as she was halfway down the stairs to leave, she said the most important sentence I'd heard in years. She says, do you know what, Joan and Thomas? I'm coming here every Friday at 10 o'clock just to make sure you're both okay. And suddenly the world didn't feel so lonely. And suddenly we didn't feel so alone. So she's one of many reasons to remind each one of you today that you make a difference, that you make a difference. As she came into our life that day, we felt we had nowhere to go. And after we met a nurse just like you, Well, a nurse just like you was going to help us along the way. And you know what? If I saw her walking down the street today, I'd run across the street and throw my arms around her and say, thank you for caring for us. And I know in the busyness of life and practice and study and placement, often we can forget to share our appreciation. I certainly forgot too often in the years caring for my mum. I couldn't think clearly most days. My head was in a fog. But I've had time to reflect and I'm thinking a lot clearer today. So I won't miss an opportunity whilst I have the privilege of speaking with you. Can I thank you for choosing this remarkable and beautiful profession? Can I thank you for being a nurse yesterday? Can I thank you for being a nurse today? And can I thank you for being a nurse again tomorrow? I encourage you. I celebrate you. But most of all, I wanted to remind you with a thank you. In the second part of this session, you're going to hear Sean supporting turning good intentions into actions. After caring for my mum, I met this incredible group of people from all around the world, from Norway to Scotland to North America. And that group of people are now being mentored by Sean. I won't read his message out today because Sean is going to be speaking to you after this. But back here in Scotland and working with Sean and sharing key messages from such as Caroline Lamb, our Director General of Health and Social Care, about the importance of kindness and a willingness to listen. So I've been on a tour for the last nearly 6.5 years actually, across the UK, Ireland, and a little bit in North America, both in person and digitally. And along the way, have collected 30,000 plus What Matters to You pledges, stories, and trees. Asking teams like yours, in the university or in placement or practice, to work together, design it together, and find a space where people can share the things that matter to them and use it for reflective practice, team building, camaraderie, and improvement. But it's all based in understanding and thinking about the core principles for working with carers and young carers, that carers are recognised and valued as equal partners in care, that they're free from disadvantage, discrimination related to their caring roles, and really importantly, that carers have a right to a life out with caring. Underpinned by these 5 must-do with me steps. What matters to you and who matters to you? What kind of information do you need? And nothing about me without me. And I think keeping these at the heart of our thinking, we create more meaningful workspace relationships, and where care's being provided, we create a flexibility because we've created that care or that service on the things that matter to someone. And it's about flipping conversations away from what's the matter with you to what matters to you and who matters to you. Underpinned by 3 principles. Let's take the time to ask each other what really matters. Let's create time and space to listen to what matters. And that helps us create opportunities to do. Like, we won't always be able to do everything, but I hope you might agree that middle bit. On a difficult day, a moment or time, and you're next to someone and you can feel they're really listening to you. It's such a beautiful moment, isn't it? When you're given the space to share the things that are important to you, the things that matter to you. And Sean will speak a lot more about these in the next part of the session. Just a really quick story about listening to what matters to people. I spent multiple days at Bournemouth Hospital doing multiple talks a day, and they've embedded it in their care plans, discharge, but also part of their team meetings, what matters to us as individuals, as a team, as colleagues. Some of the team went up to the wards to listen differently to people, and one of them met Colin. And Colin said, well, I've been living with Rosemary for 30 years, and I should have asked Rosemary to marry me. So one of them got the chaplain, and one of them ran to a supermarket and bought that cake. And one of the healthcare assistants let them borrow her wedding ring. And Colin and Rosemary were married 17 hours before he passed away. And although delivering good care the days before, it's kind of based on what was the matter with Colin. And then someone flipped it to what mattered to him. For me as someone, there's lots of messages on this slide that I think really matter. But I just want to speak about the third one down today. I am here because I trust you. Please help me stay confident. No one should ever leave us feeling less confident because of our words, our actions, our incivility. So please be a confidence maker and never ever a confidence breaker. June the 9th is What Matters to You Day, and Sean will speak a bit more about that in the next part of the session. And as we think every day is a What Matters to You Day, but we celebrate it on June the 9th each year. And as it's coming towards June the 9th, I thought I'd share a little story with you that matters to me. So my mum's name was Joan Whitelaw. My mum was born on the 15th of July, 1939. Both my mum's parents died at different times before my mum was 5. This is my mum's big sister, my Auntie Agnes, who was quite a bit older than my mum. My Auntie Agnes went on to have 8 children of her own, and she brought my mum up from the age of 5, along with her own 8 children. She told my mum 3 things. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to care for you. And if you're ever scared, I will hold your hand. And I think that was the building blocks that made my mum a remarkable lady. I feel so very lucky to have been my mother's son. Then my mum started and finished school and went out to get her first ever job. Then one evening at the famous Barrowlands Ballroom in Glasgow, my mum bumped into my dad, Thomas, mum's only ever boyfriend, dad's only ever girlfriend. And when mum and dad were saving up to get married, they had very little money. Do you know that my mum spent 6 months making that wedding dress and veil with her own 2 hands? I know I'm biased because it's my mum and dad, but I think they look beautiful in that photo. And this is my mum and me on the day that I said I was going to collect people's love stories. My mum, like my dad, gave me everything and took nothing for themselves. And each one of you will have love stories to share just like mine. But it's a really quick and short description of my mum, isn't it? Mum's life. Each one of you now listening now knows a tiny little bit about Joan Whitelaw. But each one of you now knows more about my mum than most of the people involved in her care or delivered her care in the last years of her life. Because people only saw dementia and no one ever asked. No one really asked, this is your life, your care. What are the things that matter to you? And if we have no clue about the things that really matter to people, how can we really care for each other? I'm not so sure we can. But when we take time to find out what matters and who matters and how do we keep each other safe and how do we create a smile, how do we take away sadness, how do we make tomorrow a good day, then we are that nurse. But more importantly, we've just played our part in the greatest story of all, someone else's love story. And I really, I have no doubt of the great skill and academia and knowledge and learning it takes to be a nurse. But if you want me to simplify it, what do I think you really do? I really think you help people's love stories. So from a son today, can I thank each one of you for every love story you've ever helped along the way? And for the people you've still to meet, whose love stories will benefit from meeting a nurse just like you. It's been a real privilege to meet you all today, digitally. I want to thank you again. And just before I introduce my colleague, Sean, I've put a wee page together with lots of publications on the work we've been doing. There's links to 6 or 7 little films there of different experiences that were made at different times when caring for my mum. And it's kind of where we were at that moment. You can read more about the work we do in Scotland and lots of the little projects that we work in, many partnerships with health and social care. You can read about the work Sean and I are sponsoring at NHS Lothian. There's a wee link about the Kindness is the Secret initiative to create kindness ambassadors for clinical and non-clinical staff. And just my final thoughts for today. I think the most dangerous phrase in any language is we've always done it this way. I think sometimes, even when we know it's not working, that doing it the way we've always done it seems easier sometimes than trying to create improvement or create a change. So please, from me today, if it's not working, stop. Take some time to reflect. Ask and listen to the things that matter to you. Ask and listen to the things that matter to the people round about you, and try something different. And I hope Sean, and I know Sean is going to help you with some of the tools and some of the ways to turn those good intentions into actions. So thank you for inviting me along to speak today. And I'll stop sharing my slides and hand you over to my colleague, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Tommy. Well, I think it's always really powerful and helpful to remember and to hear about the story, your experience with your mum. And there'll be doorbells and things going in the background here, just ignore those. But what I'd like to do now is just focus on two things. Why what matters to you is really important, what the differences it makes, and Tommy hinted at that a little bit, and you can kind of hear that a bit as you listen to Tommy speak. I'm sure there's lots of things that you could think of that make a difference to you. But also, I want to just share, as Tommy was saying, 2 or 3 examples of what matters to you in action in the real world. So I'm just going to share my screen here a second to get my slides shared. Let's take this here, share that, and here we go. Let's put that up as a show. So Tommy, you could just maybe tell me if you can see those all right, just to confirm.
Oh.
Yep, good. You see those slides? Great.
Yes.
Great, thanks, Tommy. So, the first things first then. So why what matters to you really matters. And I'd like to share this graphic here from a publication called Intelligent Kindness. And the authors are Ballat and Campling, if you're interested in reading a bit further around this. And in their publication, Intelligent Kindness, they kind of do a diagnostic of why it is that this often feels so difficult to do in the current healthcare system. And if you think about Tommy's story, the reality that the relational part of care, those things, those connections, those human connections often are quite difficult to do. Often not through any fault of the individual, but because the system makes it difficult because of the priorities that are placed on the things, different things. So for example, Tommy telling us those, in just maybe 2 minutes, all those details about his mum that helped us to understand who she was, what made her who she was, what she loved, what she hated. That is often missing from care that's provided, and it's because the system is inattentive to human beings and to the things that matter to those human beings. So on this slide here, attentiveness is what we are describing as the what matters to you conversation, because when we understand what matters to people and we're attentive to them, we then become attuned. So that's that understanding. So remember, Tommy said, listen, understand, and then act. So when we listen and we understand, we become attuned to what matters, and that builds trust. And when we get trust in a relationship, that is where the magic really starts to happen. That's what can make all the difference. In the literature, it's described as Therapeutic Alliance. And we know that where we have relationships, healthcare and social care relationships, or any type of relationship where there's attentiveness and understanding or attunement here that builds that trust, that we get better outcomes, better results. So you can think about this in the context of a friendship. You know, if you've got a friend who listens properly to you and understands you, you trust them. And as a result of that trust, the friendship is stronger and better. It's no different in a more sort of formal healthcare or social care relationship where there's perhaps some help being provided. If someone listens properly and understands, they don't have to be our best friend. They just have to listen properly and understand. We then trust them, and that in turn helps us to get a better outcome, the best outcome that we can in the circumstances we have. And then that whole thing reinforces a kind society, a kind organization, a kind team, kind people within that team. And that's this old English word. Kindness comes from an old English word which is the word kin. And you'll be familiar perhaps with the term next of kin is the term used to describe your family member, the closest family member to you. And that's related to this word kindness. It helps us to be one big family together and help one another. So this is what's happening. When we talk about what matters to you, it sounds, well, a bit trite perhaps sometimes, but actually it's really meaningful and it's really powerful. And this circle here helps us to understand what it is that's going on when we have a what matters to you conversation. Now, so just to summarize there, what matters to you does, it helps us to build trust and get better outcomes. And that in turn reduces something called failure demand. So failure demand is when we don't get it right first time for people, when we fail to understand and do the things that they need to help them or help them to help themselves. And then that generates repeat visits, or people going here, there, and everywhere and bouncing around in a system. And that's called failure demand. And actually, what matters to you conversations help to get rid of that in any kind of system. Now, sometimes people worry about, well, how do I, it seems a bit strange, this thing, what matters to you? And it's not just about those 4 words. In fact, often that's not the best way to ask the question, just to wade straight in and say, what matters to you? It can be asked in many different ways. And actually, the way to understand how best to ask this question is just to get to know the person a little bit, because then what you can do is you can tailor the question to their personal circumstances. So it might be that you're meeting someone for the first time, and maybe the question sounds like this over on the top right here. What are the things that are most important to you at this moment in time? Or it could be somebody that you are helping with in a sort of a longer term situation, and you know that they have days where they're better and days where they're not so good. You could say, well, when you have a good day, what are the things that make that day good? Or when you have a bad day, what are the things that make the day bad? And then you can start to understand what helps and what gets in the way, and you can try to do more of the helping stuff and help to reduce the stuff that's not helpful. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to go over? Great way to finish off a conversation, just in case you've kind of inadvertently gone off on your own agenda and not left space for the person. It's kind of a check, if you like, at the end, just to make sure that you haven't missed what really matters here. Or maybe again at the beginning of a conversation, the top left there, what would you like to achieve as the result of us working together? You've come to see us today, you feel you've got an issue. What would be a good outcome for you? What would good look like? So these are all what matters to you questions. And there are 100 others and more that are also what matters to you questions. What we're talking about when we say what matters to you conversation is make a space. Just make a space where you listen properly to the other person and understand what it is that's really important for them, and then start to work together with them to make some progress. So here's some examples then of how people have made a space. So think of this as making a space to listen. That's what we're talking about here. So there's 2 wonderful ladies on the screen here. The top lady at the top is Jennifer Rogers. She's at the time this picture was taken, she was a senior nurse in a children's ward. She's now a senior nurse in a whole health system. So what matters to you is good for your career. There you go. That's a top tip. And Geraldine, at the time this was taken, she was a senior nurse in a medicine for the elderly, care of the elderly and rehabilitation unit in Glasgow. And she's now a senior nurse in a hospital system as well. And both of these two individuals understood that what matters to you was important and wanted to find a way to make it happen reliably for every person every time. And so they thought, well, we can't just hope that it happens. We need to sort of be proactive. So Jennifer at the top there went in, and what she did with the children was she found that it was great for them to be able to make a poster, to give them some crayons and some stickers and draw pictures and write down what mattered to them, and a little poster which would then go up beside their bed. And so when you came to the bed space, immediately you could get a taste of who this little person was that you were meeting with. And Geraldine saw this happening in the children's ward in the hospital that Jen worked in. She thought, I think we could do something like this for older people too. And the idea, the children's posters are spread all over the world now. There's people in Brazil and in the US and Canada, all over Scotland, in England as well, who are using that process of getting the children to draw a poster. And then Geraldine, I'll share Geraldine's version of it in a moment or two. So here's little Amy, who's age 6, and there's her poster that she's proudly holding up. And everyone said, oh, we know what children will want. They'll just want sweets and their toys, and we don't need to do this with them. And actually, well, here's what Amy said. She said, I want to get the right medicine. I want the doctors and nurses to ask me how I'm feeling and not just talk to my mum. I like mummy staying with me. I prefer Emla cream and not the spray. That's the stuff to numb her skin when she's getting a drip put in. She loves painting and drawing, and she likes kind nurses. So there you go. These were the things that really mattered to Amy. And you can see there's some things there about medicine safety. There's things about her mum, so the people who matter to her. There's things about her care. There's things about her relationships with the staff who work in the department. And there's also a very specific thing about a specific bit of care that she likes in a particular way. So you can see there's all sorts of things here coming from a 6-year-old that will help us deliver safer, more effective, more person-centered care that's kind, and helps her to get better and get to where she needs to get to. And here's how Geraldine did this. Geraldine just made a simple kind of like a mind map, really, or a Venn diagram. So it's not really a Venn diagram, it's more of a mind map. What's important to me is in the middle, and then the person would just put around the outside various things that were important to them. So there's all sorts of things on this one, like, friends and family were important to this lady, things about what sort of radio stations she likes to listen to, what she likes in her coffee, what she doesn't like on her toast, and so on and so forth. And there's a great story about a lady who what mattered to her, although they didn't know to start with, was her rosary beads, and they'd been tidied away in a drawer. And the poor lady was distressed. She had dementia. She wasn't able to say what mattered to her. She was distressed. She was trying to climb out of bed. She was wandering, and nobody knew what to do. And in the end, had to have a nurse sitting with her all the time to try and keep her safe, until a family member came in, a distant family member, and said, oh, she always has her rosary beads. And when they found them and gave them to her, she settled down completely. She stopped wandering. She stopped trying to climb out of bed in the night. So that one piece of what matters to you information meant that she was much, much safer. She could have fallen and broken her hip and spent months in hospital. That can be a fatal injury in many elderly people. None of that happened because we found out what mattered, and we delivered safe, effective, kind care for this lady. And I'd like to just finish with one more story about the impact that having a process to understand what matters to you, having a space, making a space to understand what matters. And this is a story about a team who worked in my local hospital here in the cardiology department. And this man, Robert Murphy, had cardiac failure and didn't have long to live. He probably only had a year or 18 months to live when this story that I'm telling you took place. And he was regularly in and out of hospital because his heart wasn't pumping very well, and he would have to have diuretic therapy, very powerful sort of aggressive diuretic therapy, which could only be administered as an inpatient. So he'd have to come into hospital for 2 or 3 days and have this diuretic therapy and then go home again. And when he came into hospital, he was the grumpiest, most unpleasant, awkward individual, and the nurses really dreaded it when he came in. And then they thought about this what matters to you approach, and one of the problems we often find with people that are not getting on well is the problem's not with them, or the root cause of the problem's not with them. The root cause of the problem is with us. So we often talk about problem patients or problem families, or people who are, you know, repeat sort of visitors, or frequent flyers is another term that's used. Try to turn that on its head and think about, actually, these are people whose needs are not being met. These are people who we are failing to understand what matters to them and what they really need. And so the team here with Robert decided to ask him the question. Well, Robert, this is Catherine, who was one of the senior nurses. Whoops, a daisy, we've gone too far forward there. This is Catherine, one of the senior nurses in the team. And she asked that question, one of those questions we had on the screen earlier. Robert, what are the things that are really important to you right now? And this is what he said. He said, the Ian, which is Donna, his wife. So his wife was important. So it was a person that was important to him. We often find that, don't we? It's people that matter most to us and the relationships with those people. So Donna, his wife, people being positive around me, sleeping in my own bed, not stuck in hospital, and the football team that he loved to watch and support. So here's 4 very straightforward things that Robert, now nobody had ever asked him this question. Nobody knew these were the things that mattered to Robert, because no one had ever asked. And now they have asked him, when they asked him this question, they said, why? Okay, why? Well, make sure that we have good, positive conversations around you about, you know, making you better and getting you out of here. And also, we're going to make the main objective of our care to help you sleep in your own bed, not in a hospital bed. And so the team started to collect data on how many nights Robert got to sleep in his own bed, and actually other patients like Robert as well, because they found out it wasn't just Robert that wanted to sleep in his own bed. There were a whole group of patients in similar circumstances who just wanted to spend as much time at home, the precious time they had left at home, as possible. And so they created a project, an improvement project called Spending Precious Time at Home. And they basically redesigned the care they delivered around the diuretic therapy to make sure it was administered in short bursts as a day patient, rather than coming in and having to stay in hospital for 3 days. So come in, have a burst of diuretic and be monitored for a few hours, and then go home and sleep in his own bed. Come back again the next day, have a short burst of diuretic, be monitored a few hours, go home and sleep in his own bed. And so what they did, they designed care around what mattered to the patient. And what they found with this was that actually it was good. It was not only good for the patient, it was good for the service. So less days required in hospital, less overnight stays in hospital, more efficient. Better outcome for the patient. He was having less admissions to hospital. So again, more effective, and also that in itself more efficient as well. So, you know, better use of resources. But it starts with what matters to the patient, not with trying to save resources, or even not with trying to find the most effective treatment. It's understanding what matters and what's needed, and then designing against that demand once we understand it. So there you go. There's a few examples of how people have put this into practice in the real world, and the real difference that it makes in people's lives. And the message to take away from this is, you just need to make a space to listen, to really listen to your busy mind when you're under pressure and working hard, and lots and lots to think about. Just for a minute, just make a space and listen and understand what matters to the person that you're working with. So, and we'd invite you to join us on June the 9th and celebrate What Matters to You Day with people all around the world who are either celebrating the What Matters to You conversations that they're having, or if they're wanting to get started and make sure this is a real sort of priority for their team, using it as an opportunity to kickstart their What Matters to You activities. So there we go. Hopefully there's some food for thought there, and some useful information that will help you make What Matters to You day, and every day a What Matters to You day in your day-to-day work. So back to you, Tommy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you to University of Glasgow, to Jane Joy and colleagues for the invite to come along. And thank you to nursing colleagues in Singapore. It's been an absolute privilege to record this session for you. As mentioned before, there'll be a little information page comes along with this, with lots of links, more information on what matters to you, how to register, how to download resources, and lots of little publications that both Sean and I have been involved in along the way. So, yeah, Sean, have you any final words just before we sign off for today?
Just go and do it. If you're not already doing it, just go and do it. Try it with one person. Just go to one person, even just a colleague that you're working with, and have a what matters to you conversation. Just try it. You won't regret it. So
thank you, Sean. Thank you for taking time to join me today. And thank you from Scotland. I'm in Glasgow in Scotland. Sean's a bit further up in northern Scotland than I am. But thank you for the opportunity. And yeah, thank you for today. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.